wanna stay ahead of the curve, then follow my words. All we do is teach, train, innovate, solve. Yeah. Teach, train, innovate, solve. If you wanna be ahead of the curve, then follow my words.
Good evening, good evening, good evening, everyone. Welcome back to TTIS, where we build confident, empowered educators through empathy, strategy, and practical tools that you can use today. Tonight's topic is a great one. 3 questions that will guide your decision to either reteach or move on. I think that our discussion tonight will be poignant in helping those that are new or novice educators get a grasp on how we make these instructional decisions and how we explain some external expectations. So this session will build around clarity around our professional judgment by grounding your reteach or move on decisions in evidence, in alignment, and intentional next steps. Because when we decide to reteach or to move on, what usually drives that decision? I know that many pacing guides don't reflect the common practice of reteaching. There's an expectation that you do it, but it does not necessarily drive it through. So tonight I will, because if we ground decisions in evidence, not assumptions, then we can grow our students. When we separate students' needs from pacing anxiety, along with targeted practices, we can grow our students. And we focus and we can focus on clarity over compliance. And yes, I'm going to say this phrase quite a bit tonight. So I'm going to say it up front, grow our students. Because that is what we're reteaching process really should do. According to TEA, reteaching is a data-driven, strategic, and often small group instructional approach where teachers instruct content again for students who didn't grasp it the first time. And before I get any deeper into that discussion, I want to give you the whole lot of what we're going to discuss tonight. So my goal tonight is to talk about reteaching and give you the definition, which I'll pour a little bit more into that in just a moment. To talk you through 3 guiding questions. And during those 3 guiding questions, I want to discuss and give you some guidance on when and how to make that decision, whether again, to reteach or to move on. And so let's get back to that full definition before we drive into the 3 questions that I'm going to give to guide you to whether or not to reteach or to move on. And that is what TEA describes reteaching practice as. Yes, it is data-driven. Yes, most of the time it's done as a small group instructional strategy. And again, who's it for? Those students that did not grab the instruction the first time. And as a teacher, you identify the gaps. You use those targeted instructional intervention strategies to help your students understand the objectives. So this causes for us to reflect. And I've chosen 3 questions to help us to get there. And the first of those questions is, what was the learning target? I think it was good to ponder there. Because honestly, if students cannot explain what they were expected to learn, the issue might not be content. It may be clarity. So, as my guiding questions on your screen, was the learning target explicitly stated? by you or repeated by your students? Was success modeled or exemplified? Was there a product that you could show them that they needed to produce? And did students know what the mastery would look like for those opportunities where I'm not going to show them the model, but I'm going to allow them to come up with using said rubric, physical example I'm going to leave out. But if I'm teaching a math lesson and I begin by saying, today we're going to work on fractions. Students, they're going to open up their book. They're going to start solving problems. Some may multiply. Some might draw a model for me. And a few, they're going to wait for cues. And then when asked, what are they learning? The responses are going to vary. You've been in the room like I have, and they go around people who are coming in to watch and ask students questions. And if you're hearing these type of responses, like we're doing the worksheet, we're adding fractions, or the dreaded, I'm not sure. At the end of the lesson, several students, they are going to miss the exit ticket. But should I consider reteaching? In this instance, to me, it's not the math. The issue is the learning target. The target's too broad. It's not explicit enough. Students were never told what they were expected to learn or how they would know that they were successful. So offer a clearer target. Today, we're going to add fractions with unlike denominators by creating equivalent fractions. That is way more clearer, way more explicit. You can even throw in something like, you know you're successful when you explain your steps using a model. And in this case, reteaching the entire lesson is unnecessary. What students needed is the reteach of clarity, not the content. When the learning targets is explicit and instructional decisions become easier, more defendable, and more effective. I've seen far too many teachers that don't understand that part. Some that don't value the need for a clearer objective or targets. But this question, what was the learning target, suggests that we reflect on our practices first, because how we begin directly affects the student's product that they produce. But also suggests that you probe your students with statements to get their perspective. Something like, before I release you to work, let's restate what we were learning and why. That way, if the target was unclear, you could reteach for clarity right then and there. But if the target was clear, they can feed you back what they know they're going to be doing. Then move on to the next question. And our next question is, who is struggling and how many? Because again, whole group reteaching is not always the most responsive move. And I don't know if I said that before, but that is something I really want to highlight because I see a lot of that happening in classrooms that I have the pleasure of visiting. But here are some quick ways to assess their understanding. Exit tickets. And somewhere I will place a video where I talk about assessments up above. Or maybe I choose one aligned question for them to respond to so that I know where their thinking is. I love to see whiteboards and quick writes before there's this verbal response. But also, some students can explain it. That also can equate to maybe not just looking at whether they chose the correct answer or not. And I'll talk a little bit later about that. But in our decisions that we're going to make, I'd like to kind of relate it to an average of the student's need. So most students struggle with it. Yes, reteaching a whole group using a different strategy is going to be the best approach. But if there are some students that struggle, moving on and then planning a targeted small group support would be my next advice. And then finally, if there are a few students that struggle, move on and scaffold during your independent practice. Because moving on when a few students are struggling does not mean that you're leaving students behind. It means that you're responding strategically. Because we can't ignore the time factor. It's real. We can't spend time on reteaching everything. And now that you've decided that there is some form of reteaching that must take place, then it leads me to my next question, which is what kinds of errors are you really seeing? There are a number of ways to look at errors or categorize them per se. Because not all of the errors require you reteaching. I want to drill us down to 3 that I do think requires to some extent either a reteach or a clarification. Conceptual errors, that's when the student misunderstands the idea. A procedural error, the student knows the idea, but might have missed a step. And then a careless error. Sometimes I call it pacing error too. This is where students rush or have misread what they're expected to do. Now that we've kind of drilled down to the true source, let's address some of those errors. So what I have on your screen is one way that I would deal with conceptual errors. Best practices says to reteach with a new representation or a different model. This will help your students to understand better. For the procedural errors, you can provide guided practice and then give them feedback. And not feedback a week from now. The best practice is feedback, immediate feedback, so that you can clear it up right then and there. And for the careless errors, I'm going to say that you need to address the habit. Here, it's not the content. It's the habits that students have formed, like I said earlier, about them rushing or maybe misreading the question altogether. So repeating this or looking at the various errors in the way that you want to describe them best will help us to know what approach to take. But this approach is not one that I want you to take. Repeating the same explanation is not reteaching. And this statement, it reminds me of a book that I truly did love. And it was entitled, You Can't Just Say It Louder. This book was about, has influenced my thoughts on quite a few things, but this particular book is about differentiated strategies to help readers become better readers. But I mention it here because reteaching is not saying the same thing louder or longer. All you're really doing with that method is reinforcing confusion. And remember, our goal is to help our students grow. So some more effective teaching strategy, reteaching practices are a new representation of the objective. So I'd say go down and talk to your colleagues and see if they are using a different method, because when we're doing these data analysis, we'll see that some teachers scored higher on one teach versus another. Well, go down there and talk to them about what it is that they're doing with their student to see if it's different than what you're doing, and then be ready to implement that practice. Another practice could be to look at a model or work an example that would bring more clarity to whatever the objective or goal is that you're tackling. And even selecting fewer problems sometimes allows you to be able to give them tighter feedback. My last suggestion is to revamp the language that you align to the original objective. like I expressed earlier when I talked about the math example in regards to fractions. But these are all ways in which we get better. Each time when we're teaching a concept to our students that aren't quite grasping it. And I really want to leave you with something to ponder. And that is, which of these 3 questions, the ones that I posed tonight, are you most often skipping over, leaving out, or even not questioning it when you're thinking of whether you need to reteach or whether you need to move on? Because when you can clearly explain why you reteach or why you move on, your instruction becomes defendable, aligned, and intentional. You can justify the reason why you're using your response to intervention time in a certain matter. And of course, pair it with data. Tonight, I'm not going to talk to you any deeper about the data because I'm going to limit it because there's so many variations of data that you could use. But I posed a few tonight in regards to an exit ticket and you as a teacher and your observation. And so it brings me to my next point that talks about some of the common traps that I see. And some of those common traps are reteaching because the student looks confused. Or maybe I'm moving on because this pacing guy said that I need to be on this day and I got to get there. And yes, we want to drive that. But sometimes when we don't make a stop at things that are foundational skills, and we fly past that and we know the students need to be re-explained over this, it's going to shoot us in the foot eventually. And the last common trap that I believe I'll just say is my pet peeve is teachers re-explaining to the whole group when only a few students need that support. When my instructional decisions are data informed and not emotionally driven, the students are going to respond with growth. And my last probing question to you tonight: what data will you look for before deciding to reteach the next time? How are you going to utilize these precious minutes that we're given to get our students to that year's growth that I talk about all the time? I hope these questions and the 3 questions that I presented to you earlier, along with the definition of what reteaching is, have been supportive to you. As always, I am grateful for you being here, that you landed on our channel, knowing that what I'm giving to you is my 26 plus years of instructional information. Things that experiences and materials that I've read and used that will help you along your way as you perfect your craft. Our company believes in providing clear, empathetic, understanding strategies to you to help you with practical tools on how to make it in your classroom. Our website is above, ttinnovate.com, and our social media platforms are listed below. If you're here on YouTube with me tonight, please subscribe and like and share. It helps us to grow and reach others that may need our services. And it also allows me to continue to do what I'm passionate about. And that is sharing my knowledge of the pedagogy in order to help people to effectively pass their state exams, to help them in their classroom, whether it be classroom management or classroom instructional strategies, to grow. My name is Tamara Gibson. I'm the owner and CEO of TT Innovative Solutions, and I'm grateful for you being here tonight. Have a great evening, everyone, and I will see you again next Monday at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. Good night.